I just want to start with your story of what made you go carnivore. How did that happen for you?
Totally being made to feel like I'm making this up, like it was all in my head. Mr. Ferrigno, what do you want us to do for you? And he crossed his arms. I was literally at the point of wanting to end my life if I couldn't get through this issue.
What if all of the things that we think are wrong with us because we're getting old aren't? Like, what if you're not supposed to get sick before you die?
And it was a very painful death. It was a very long, drawn-out problem, and it broke his spirit more than it even broke his body, and it terrified me.
This video is brought to you by Purely Tallow Skincare. And with skincare, the rule is simple. If you wouldn't eat it, you shouldn't put it on your skin. That's why we make all of our products with 100% grass-fed beef tallow. We also use emu oil and even wild camel hump fat in some of our lotions. Check out our website at purelytallow.com.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Carnivore Revolution. I'm Serena, and today my guest is Dante Ferrigno, just like the Incredible Hulk. And he's got an incredible journey, an incredible story to share about the carnivore diet. He actually has a YouTube channel called Ferrigno Freedom. And thank you so much for being here, Dante. I'm excited for this conversation.
I'm honored to be here. Thank you for having me, Serena.
Thank you. It's pretty cool. So as soon as you came on the Zoom call, I was laughing about your shirt. You love vegetarians are delicious. And I just want to show mine. World's Worst Vegan. So we've both got like our A-game best t-shirts on for today, right? You can't see mine, but everybody can see yours. So that's awesome. So I started carnivore on May 24th, 2021. You started January that same year. But my very first introductions to the carnivore diet was finding your video of 125 days on the line diet. And I remember watching that. Of course, I also found Kelly Hogan and Dr. Lisa Wiedemann, and I found Sean Baker's, podcast with Joe Rogan, all the normal things that everybody finds, and that's how they start carnivore. But I found yours, and it resonated with me so much because I was just getting started too. And when you're starting a journey like that, something that seems so crazy, you feel so alone, and watching everybody else's stories felt so far away for me, even yours, even seeing that you were 125 days in was like, gosh, that seems like such a long time. But here I am, and here you are. It's been almost 4.5 years for you. It's been almost 4 years for me, and it's pretty exciting. So I just want to start with your story of what made you go carnivore. How did that happen for you? I like to start there with people so that the audience knows what happened with you.
Sure. Well, it's so funny. All my life, I tried to be a healthy person. At least it was my goal, but I was always struggling against what seemed like genetics. I mean, even as a young child, I was the kid that had to wear the trash bag to run around on his body to run around the track at football practice, which was not very good for my interpersonal relationships. It was easy to be made fun of and deal with all that stuff and being the chubby kid and having a hard time with dating and things like that and feeling awkward. But once I got to high school, all of a sudden, it was my senior year, actually, I started to trim up a little bit just from, I guess, the natural growth spurt. And then one of the guys that I'd always known as one of the jocks, he said, "Hey, man, why don't you join the wrestling team? You look like you've got some strength to you. You'd be good." And I was about 210 pounds then, and I thought, okay, I'll give it a shot. I found out that when you're 210 pounds, anything over 189 is wrestling heavyweight. And that goes all the way up to 275. So I was wrestling with some monsters, and I said, my goodness, they're all 275. Like they get the max when they're heavyweight. And I said, well, I'm not gaining 65 pounds to wrestle. So I figured out a way to lose 21 pounds. And back then I was following the standard advice, eating a lot of fruit and salad and stuff like that. Mostly a lot of exercise, a lot of jump rope, a lot of things that were designed to help lose weight. And I said, man, this is the way I want my body to feel. But it was always a bridge too far to keep it that way because I was always starving eating salads, and fruit was never enough, and all the other things that I was trying, shakes and, blending stuff together and making all the things that bodybuilders do. That didn't last. And then I got married young, and very quickly the weight started coming on as, you get married and fat and happy and all that. So it was a struggle, but I still tried to eat healthy. I always listened to the advice of all the low-fat people out there, watching Richard Simmons and these kind of people telling us what to do. Even tried Weight Watchers and things for a little while, and this is just...
You're dating yourself just a little bit by talking about Richard Simmons, but that's okay.
That's okay. I don't mind. I'm proud to be 52 years old. I'm proud to be Gen X too.
That's right.
So it's great. But it was always a struggle. And even as time went on, I remember when I was in my 30s and I made a trip to Italy, the first time I'd ever got a chance to go overseas. And I remember when I got on the scale before I got on the plane, I don't know why it was checking it at this time. I was 302 pounds. And I thought, what am I doing at 302 pounds? 210, I felt like I was overweight in high school. So having 90 more pounds was a surprise. And after I got back from Italy, I learned something. I learned that our food is very different here than it is overseas. And this was in 2006, but I didn't quite get it yet. I just thought maybe it was fresher or something like that. I didn't learn what I learned about food until I got to carnivore diet. But when I got back, one of the things I did is I did the Atkins diet because I was watching my my district manager for the company I worked for at the time. He'd visit us about once every 6 weeks. And every time he came in, he was getting smaller and smaller. And he told me about the Atkins diet revolution, that I needed to read this book and then follow the instructions and it would help. And I did. Now, I also did that using phentermine to help me control my appetite. So it wasn't quite the same, but it was a lot of meat. It did have a lot of other things, though. Like he said, green vegetables were an important part of your daily regimen, and that ranch dressing was okay, and mayonnaise was okay, and certain things that I would avoid now because they have seed oils in them that I learned about. But I did lose 88 pounds doing the Atkins diet in 6 months, so I changed a lot, but I didn't change the way I thought about food. I just went on a diet. And that's, I think, the big difference that comes later is that this was not about going on a diet. However, I did gain the weight back about 3 years after I had been off Atkins. I'd regained all the weight and then some. Maybe I wasn't over 300, but I gained enough to where I was like, my goodness, what have I done to myself? So I started trying to exercise again, always struggling to get the weight off. But eventually, I got married again, and life changed with that. And I was back up I remember the highest before I stopped looking at the scale was 289 pounds. And I said, man, I've got to do something about this. But I didn't even go back and think about Lion Diet then. I didn't think about Atkins diet rather. And I hadn't even heard of Lion Diet yet. But once I got this bit of a scare, I had this gut problem that was hurting me in 2020. And I didn't know what exactly started it. It might have had something to do with the fact that I had 3 huge rounds of antibiotics at the beginning of 2020. Looking back, we believe now that we had the earliest form of COVID, and they were just throwing everything but the kitchen sink at me to fix it. And 3 rounds in a row within 3 weeks of antibiotics probably did some disaster to my gut. And a lifetime of eating various things, including a lot of vegetables, but also a lot of junk food. I was a sweetaholic. I was the kind of guy that would, try to keep away from the sweets, but once a day to me was keeping away from the sweets.
Right.
Back then, it got to be so painful that I was going to see my doctor, and I would see my GI doctor, and they did scope up one end and they scope down the other. Thankfully, they used different scopes, but they were trying to find what's causing this pain, because I used to describe it. I said, it feels like there's a black hole right above my belly button. As a matter of fact, it was right in the spot where they went through laparoscopically to remove my gallbladder back in 2002. So I thought it might have something to do with that. But they said, nope, there's nothing wrong with your surgery area. There's nothing that they can see a problem with. And I didn't know that leaky gut was not a doctor's diagnosis. But later on, I found out about leaky gut. And the way I found out about that was after dealing with this nonsense with doctors for over a year, totally being made to feel like I'm making this up, like it was all in my head. Maybe I was pill seeking in their eyes. I don't know why. I didn't have a history of any drug use or anything like that. So for whatever reason, they were making me feel like I was just making it up, like I was seeking doctor's advice. I know there's hypochondriacs and people that get, psychologically wrapped around that. but I was in a lot of pain. And
Mhm.
I remember the ER doctor, or not the ER doctor, but the doctor after I woke up one day in the ER because I didn't even know how I got there. I was in so much pain, and I had screamed all through the night. And the next morning, the doctor came in finally to tell me something after 8 hours of screaming. And I said, what's wrong with me, doc? And he said, Mr. Ferrigno, what do you want us to do for you? And he crossed his arms. He had this real, like, that's typically a body posture that says
Yeah.
you're being defensive. And I thought, why is this doctor approaching me this way? Like I'm making this up. Like I don't, it was very confusing and very upsetting. And I said, I want you to fix the problem. And he said, we can't find any problem. I said, well, there's clearly a problem. So if you're not finding it, what's wrong? So for whatever reason, they couldn't explain that to me. I know now they couldn't prescribe anything for it. Leaky gut, which is ultimately what I've determined that it was because of the amount of pain that I get from eating even the smallest amount of seasonings, was the main problem. Well, I said, I've either got to do this. Let me tell you how I found out about the carnivore diet is I was following Jordan Peterson. In 2020, everybody was going through a lot of mental issues. Let's say we were locked down. We were worried about what's going to go on with our finances. We were worried about a lot of things. And I was running a retirement home, so I had the added pressure of trying to keep 18 to 24 other people, elderly people, safe from this thing that's supposedly very bad for elderly people. So that was weighing heavily on us, and it was difficult because even our employees would get sick and we'd have to fill in. My wife and I would be working double shifts sometimes and triple shifts, working through the night. So it was just really a lot of stress. And I found Jordan Peterson. I don't even remember why. I just kept hearing his name. And he was helping me with some of the psychological things I was dealing with at the time. And I gained a lot of respect for him as an individual, as a teacher, as a person that's sharing knowledge. But what surprised me was when I saw him on Joe Rogan, it was probably in December of 2020. And Joe Rogan said, so you still doing that all beef diet thing that you've been doing? And I remember thinking to myself, wait, what? All
That's
beef diet?
insane.
Yeah. Well, even for somebody who had done Atkins, where I
Yeah.
used to go to the restaurant across the street from the place I worked at, and I would get the to-go box and load up on the steaks after 4:00 because they had steaks on the buffet there.
Yeah.
So I knew I was eating a lot of meat, but I was also told you got to pound a lot of vitamins, you got to have all the greens, you got to have some other stuff. And I thought, I didn't think you could do this without all of these other things.
Right.
And I did a little bit of digging, and I found out all the things that he had been able to resolve with it. Everything from coming off of SSRIs, numb spots on his body that healed. He talked about how the gum disease, the bleeding gums issue, which apparently is related to heart disease and is supposed to be incurable, that just went away for him. And then when I heard his daughter's story, she had rheumatoid arthritis, juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, a terrible case of it. So much so that she'd been having surgeries done on her ankles and joints. They were at the verge of fusing her feet to her legs, which would have been an awful position to be in, because obviously if you can't bend your feet, that would make it very difficult to walk. But what an awful thing to live with. And somehow she had stumbled by working her way through keto and a number of other things.
Mm-hmm.
She'd stumbled on the fact that ruminant meat was the key to putting her issues into remission. And it did the same thing for her father with all of his issues. And I said, well, why are they able to do it without all the vegetables and things? Because I was convinced that the nutrition was in the vegetables. I thought the meat was just like a way to trick your body into being in starvation mode, even though you're feeding yourself. Well, it turns out there's far more nutrients in the meat than there were in the vegetables. Yep. And the one thing that I was missing, at least it was key for me, and I know it's not the same for everybody, was salt. I needed to have salt. I had been avoiding salt my whole life because I had high blood pressure throughout my 20s and 30s, and I'd been told that it was bad for you. I'd convinced myself that I didn't like the flavor of salt. I would always avoid even the chips that were like salt and vinegar. I don't want that because it's got salt in it. Yeah, once I found out about the salt part, and realized that that's where the energy comes from, or at least some of the energy is that you're losing electrolytes when you're eating a lot of meat. You're not retaining those electrolytes when you're not eating sugar. And that was the ticket. Once I found that out, I said, okay, I can give this a try. And if it fixed all of those things for them, maybe it'll fix this for me, because this is my last hope. I was literally at the point of wanting to end my life if I couldn't get through this issue. And if I lived by myself, I may have, but I had a wife and I have 2 children that I love very much. And I want to be able to provide for them, and I want to be able to be there for them and watch them grow up and spend time with my wife as she gets old. All these things were in my mind. And I said, I've got to fight. So I said, I'm going to try this. And I remember that first day, and you can see it in the video. My plan was to try this for 6 weeks just to see what would happen. And here I am 4 years and 3 months later, and I'm still going at it.
It's just amazing because we've been told the wrong things for years and years. When I went carnivore, I had been like a juicing fiend. I would do 21-day juice fast. Like, I thought I was being so healthy. I would 3/4 of my plate was vegetables, and the other, quarter of it was lean chicken breast or really lean ground turkey. I mean, remember that? Like, I was puffy and bloated and I stayed a little bit overweight, like 10, 15 pounds. And nobody told me you should be eating fatty meat. I went to several doctors and nobody told me, except I did have one kind of a functional medicine doctor that kind of put me on an extremely low carb diet. He didn't call it carnivore. He wanted me to have like some berries and some greens, but I didn't, because I do everything like, as far as you can go. I like, if somebody tells me go very low carb, I go like no carb. I did feel really good, but I felt like it was wrong. And so when I went off of that, it was just easy to fall back into my pattern because I knew that it wasn't good for me, right? It's so easy to go off of carnivore because somewhere deep inside in our heads, it's not good for us. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and we're swimming upstream against society on it too. I mean,
yeah. And it's so hard to I still sometimes think to myself, like when I reach for cheese at the grocery store or something, my hand instinctively goes to the part skim mozzarella by accident, even though I'm looking for the whole mozzarella. You know what I mean? Like, it's somewhere in here still. It's so hard to break that, right?
Yeah.
So hard to break it. So in 4 years and 3 months, have you had any setbacks? Have you had any times where you just kind of eat whatever you want or go off plan?
I've gone off plan a few times, but I've also planned to go off plan before, because after 125 days on Lion Diet took off like it did, I mean, I had a YouTube channel for the purpose of doing video games, because I was helping my son learn how to do this. If he was going to be broadcasting on YouTube, I wanted to make sure he was doing it with some guidance.
Yeah.
So I never intended this to be what it was. But after that video took off and the next day I woke up and it had close to 100,000 views, I thought, oh my goodness.
Crazy.
I got to keep talking about this. And my wife was like, yeah, you've hit a chord with somebody. I didn't know about the rest of the carnivore community either.
That's crazy.
As time went on and I started to get the comments from the people and learn that there was more out there, I thought, well, once I get to this point where I feel like I've cleaned up some, I'll see what I can add back in and try to see what my body would allow me to do, because I would love to have cheese. I'd love to have eggs. I wanted to have butter, but I was doing strict ruminant meat, water, salt, nothing else. And even during the first 125 days, I talk about mistakes I made. I remember having a Pop-Tart during the first 125 days, but it was so awful that I spit most of it out because it didn't taste anything like I remembered.
Yeah.
Getting clean off of that stuff really changes your palate.
Does.
But again, I've tried a few things. I tried to add back vegetables at different times, different types of vegetables, and they always cause me to have indigestion of some kind or some gut pain, sometimes even mental distress, because your gut and your brain are very tied together. And I think the leaky gut is something that just lasts. It permeates for a long time. It's even called permeated gut, but it sticks around for a long time. It takes a while to heal. So I tried those things. I did get to a point where fruit didn't upset my gut, but my problem was keeping from eating too much of it, because I'd gotten used to not eating any sugar. I realized that, well, now, if I want to have an apple, it's like 6 or 7 apples before the day's over. And I'm like, okay, well, now I'm defeating the purpose of what I'm doing here, and I'm getting a lot of sugar again. So even though I think I can tolerate some of the fruits better than I could before, that healing is there. It's just something that I found that I did better without because
Right.
it did start to add weight gain. I tried probably almost a year after that. I experimented with milk, thinking that, well, it's an animal product. Let's see if this is going to work. And I thought, well, I'll go with whole milk. You know, I know skim milk is all the fat's gone, and 2% milk is even, you know, it's less fat too. I thought whole milk had more fat. I didn't realize it was only about 5% of the fat too.
Yeah.
But I got hooked on it for a little bit. You know, that
Like a gateway
lactose.
drug.
It is. The lactose is still sugar,
Mhm.
and it was drawing me right back in. And then after about a month of doing that, I said, man, I've gained 15 pounds. What in the world's going on? I got to cut the milk out. I got my head out of my rear end on that one and said, I got to cut the milk back out. Now, I've had people say things about raw milk being good, and some people do that, and some people do kefir. I just found that I don't need it. I'd rather stay away from it. So I've learned a lot of lessons from these things. And I guess one key time where I really went off base was when my stepfather died. It was a bit of a surprise.
Mm.
We think it was related to some injections that he got that we had recommended that he shouldn't get. So I try not to go into too much detail because I don't. My mother watches these and it really hurts her.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm
But
sure.
it hurt us both to see him go, and I remember being so depressed when I had went for his funeral. And at my mother's house, there was a thing of vanilla ice cream, which was always my favorite comfort go-to food. And I don't remember if I ate the whole thing, but I ate a whole lot of it. And the next day, I was in pain. My kidneys they felt like rocks,
Mm.
that part of my lower back. And I said, this is not good. This is not, if your body reacts to food like this, there's something wrong with it.
Yeah.
And then I started looking at the label, and this is when I really dug into labels. Things like partially hydrogenated vegetable oil and corn syrup and citric acid being added to things. A lot of people don't know citric acid is not something that comes from lemons and limes when they use it in food. It comes from a fungus called Aspergillus or Aspergillus niger. I can never remember the proper way to say it.
Yeah.
But the thing about that citric acid is it causes inflammation in your body. So it's no wonder I was going around in pain eating the same food everybody else was eating, because most of this stuff causes some kind of inflammation in your body or causes you to, like your kidneys will hold on to all that salt.
Right.
And then that salt stays in your body, raises your blood pressure, causes edema and other things. But when you're eating the right things, it doesn't do that.
That doesn't happen. And you can easily, if you don't have a problem with the dairy, which many of us do have a problem with dairy and we eat it anyway. I don't know why we do that, but we do. And if you you can make your own ice cream. If you're okay with having some dairy sometimes, you can make your own ice cream with egg yolks and heavy cream and some salt. Really, it tastes amazing. If you're not used to eating sweet things, you can make your own all natural ice cream with 2 or 3 ingredients, and it's still just as wonderful of a treat, except you don't have those issues the next day.
Yeah, my wife has found that to be helpful for her journey. She just hasn't made as many as she would like yet, but I think that's the hard part, is that if it's not easily accessible, it's one of those things that's easy to grab it from the store, or her sister will come into town and bring some, and then she winds up digging into that. But she did well with that. I don't do well with dairy hardly at all. I found that Irish butter I can tolerate. I had my back and forth with it for a while, but it seems like now Irish butter doesn't do me any damage.
Yeah. Well, that's good because, butter is such a good healthy fat that, it's nice when you can have that. So you mentioned genetics earlier when you were talking about your story. So was your family overweight too?
Oh, yeah. Well, my father was overweight. I know when I was born, I saw a picture of him and he looked as big as I did in my 48 range. I don't know what his weight was, but I do know, I remember him being a smoker and developing type 2 diabetes at some point. I don't remember when he developed that, but he was 50 when I was born. So, I mean, there was a lot going on before I got here. And I remember him being a candy guy. He went for sweets.
Mm-hmm.
And it was sad to see, because eventually diabetes is what got him in the end. And it was a very painful death. It was a very long, drawn-out problem where he had his foot removed first, and then eventually he had his leg removed. And then by the time he had been off his feet for so long, his other extremities were getting worse, and he was so weak. He laid in bed for 2 years, and my mother had to change, a diaper on him type of thing. It was,
I'm so sorry. That's awful.
well, it was definitely awful to see such a strong man be reduced to such weakness and misery, and it broke his spirit more than it even broke his body. And it terrified me, the idea of this could happen to me. That was one of the reasons that I wanted to be into exercising back then, because I was only 17 when this all happened, when I was seeing him go through this.
It's crazy.
And my mother was not a heavy young girl, but being with my father, she put on a good bit of weight. He was an Italian man that liked to eat good Italian food and have her make good Italian food,
Right.
lots of pasta and things like that. So
yeah. And back then we didn't know what we know now we didn't know really. I mean, it was out there. I mean, people knew, but we didn't talk about it like we talk about it now, about our food choices causing that. And there weren't as many instances of it, even 30 years ago, which seems like a really long time, but 33 years ago, when that was going on for you and for your dad, we didn't talk about it like we talk about it now, or at least in our community, like we talk about it now. I mean, I guess most normal people aren't talking about it, except recently in the last few months. It's mainstream. We're talking about food. We're talking about nutrition. We're talking about health. We're talking about getting rid of the additives in our foods, but we didn't talk about those things as much then. And so I sometimes find it hard looking back on those 33 years ago, like when you and I were in high school, because we're actually the same age. And so we were in high school and stuff like that, but there also weren't as many sick people. So it wasn't a topic of conversation that we had all the time, right? Like nobody talked about it.
mostly I think people talked about the weight loss concern. That was the big thing that I saw a lot of push for. I remember as a young person watching the A-Team. I loved Mr. T, and he always talked about drinking milk, and I didn't realize that was a government ploy to get rid of all this dairy they had accumulated over the years. If you ever look into that story on why we had all this government cheese, it's really...
Oh my gosh, I didn't know that.
Holy cow. Look into that sometime. It'll blow your mind.
Okay.
But, I was drinking milk all the time, and then I thought, you know what? I'm still gaining weight. I'm going to switch to orange juice. I feel like orange juice is even better. It's more
lighter. It's lighter. It's healthier, right? It's fresh.
From fruit, so it's got to be healthy. I didn't realize I was switching from a little bit of sugar to pounding sugar, but
yeah.
But I was following the advice of the people who were talking about losing weight, and I remember them showing back in the 80s, they would have like a person up on a stage in one of those infomercial type of things, and they'd have this clear vat that was empty. And then they would bring out like buckets of fat, and they would pour it in there, and they say, this is how much fat people are eating in a year. And what do you think it's doing? It's just sitting there inside of you. And for some reason, they had convinced us that eating fat turned into fat. Well, it made sense to me. They were showing those visuals, and so I went low fat.
Yeah, me too. Weight Watchers all the way.
Looking back on it now, having my gallbladder removed back in 2002 was probably related to my attempt to avoid eating fat at all costs. I would get steaks and I would say, give me the sirloin. It doesn't have as much fat. I was choosing the sirloin on purpose because I thought, I'm getting more meat for my money. Everybody else is getting a ribeye with all this fat on it, and you got to cut it off.
That's right.
All the fat I threw away in those years when I did have ribeye and stuff like that, I wish I could go back and get all that fat.
You're darn right.
But I really think not having the fat in my system to let my gallbladder do its job and process fat caused that gall to sit there, or that bile to sit in the bladder and sit until it formed stones. And then when the stones are there, back then I asked them, I said, well, can you get rid of them? Can you do like that sonic thing that breaks them up and gets rid of them? They said, nope, you can't do that. You just got to get it cut out. I said, well, okay. I'd sure like to have it back now, but thankfully, I've been able to survive on a carnivore diet, eating a lot of fat, even without a gallbladder. So that's a plus. Carnivore diet seems to be a miracle for everything.
I know, and so many people ask about that. I'm sure you get that question too. A lot of people ask, can I do the carnivore diet without a gallbladder? You totally can. Some people need ox bile, but not everybody does. But that can definitely help. So I think the thing for me that is the worst about the carnivore diet is we can't go back. You know what I mean? Like, we can't unlearn what we know. we can't I guess it's that we can't unknow it, and we can't unsee our friends and family being so sick because they're ignoring us and what we're doing. Do you feel like that?
Oh yeah, it breaks my heart. It's actually probably one of the things that weighs on me the most outside of any family pressures that I have, financial stresses and things like that.
Yeah.
But when I go out in public and I see people that I don't even know, I wanna be able to walk up and just tell them, man, I got a solution for something that you probably, but I mean, there's no way to breach that conversation, with the exception of maybe wearing some weird shirts like this. Sometimes that'll get attention. And it has allowed me to have some conversations, but I see people all the time and I say, they gotta be miserable with that on, because I know what it felt like. I wanted to unzip this thing that was over me and take it off. And I felt like I could never get to that point where I could do that until the carnivore diet. And then when I see my family members, like, well, my mother, she started doing not a strict carnivore diet, but she kind of went more ketovore.
Yep.
But she lost 55 pounds.
That's amazing.
And that's in her 80s. And
Good job, Mom.
Made a big difference for her. There's no doubt about it, that she's able to get around, because she's had she developed AFib after she again got one of the shots that I recommended that she don't get, and we don't have a history of that, so that's a bit unusual that she developed that. But now she's been dealing with heart rhythm problems and stuff, and the one thing that seems to keep her going is eating right, because she had a fall. When she gets out of her car, sometimes she'll feel like she's weak when she gets from a sitting position to a standing position. And she had a fall in the parking lot at Sam's Club in Southwest Georgia during the summer. So she's laying out there on the pavement, probably cooking her face because the pavement gets over 100 degrees out there.
Yeah.
And somebody came and helped her up and got her back on her feet. And if she'd have been as heavy as she was before, she might have really done some damage. But thankfully, she had lost a lot of that weight, because I worked in a retirement home for over 10 years, and there is a huge difference between somebody having a bunch of extra weight on their body having a fall and somebody being a small frame and having a fall. It can make a big difference in the outcome. I was thankful for that, and she seems happier too, because she's able to move around better, and that makes me very happy.
Yeah, you see so many people her age. And what's her name?
Priscilla.
You said she watches your stuff. So Priscilla, good job. Congratulations. That's amazing that she's made such a difference in her own life and in her own health, because we see people her age who literally can't move around. Like, you see people who are just basically waiting. Like, I hate to say it, but they're like waiting for it to be over. Like, they just think this is the end. This is where I just sit around and watch TV for the next few years until my time is up. And I think it doesn't have to be that way. I mean, the thing that we see all the time in the health space, and it's not just in the carnivore community, but it's older people who are still moving their bodies, who never stopped moving or started again, sometimes in their 70s and even early 80s, started exercising again and completely turned their lives around. Even people in their 90s that are still jogging or still lifting weights because they started when they were 70 because they were so sick and frail and they wanted to change their lives. And I think that's true, that I've heard people say the worst thing we can do is to stop moving. And I think that's entirely true.
Mm-hmm. And I think the people that get serious about moving also get serious about what they're eating a little more. They may not go straight carnivore, but they might start cutting out a lot of the ultra processed food. And I used to see that a lot in the elderly community, because we would help people make their move transition. Like, I would go to their house and actually help them pack their furniture sometimes. And I remember looking in the cabinets and opening the freezer and seeing boxes and boxes of ready-made hamburgers and all these things that are for microwaving. And I realized this is what this man is eating. This man who's 93 years old is eating all this highly processed garbage every day. And he's wondering why he feels so just dumpy, doesn't have his strength. He's out driving around not feeling good, which is a little scarier, and there's nobody there that's going to tell them, oh, you can't drive until it's like too late. They wait until there's an accident or something, and somebody will say that you can't drive anymore. But
and And people think it's the age. People think that it's your age. And one of the things that struck me the most about Sally Norton's book, Toxic Superfoods, have you read that?
I have not read that, but I am familiar with Sally Norton.
Yeah, such a great book. One of the things she says, and I'm paraphrasing here, it's probably not exactly the right words, but it's basically that what if all of the things that we think are wrong with us because we're getting old aren't? What if it's because all of the things that have built up in our systems, and her book is about the foods that we think are superfoods that we think are amazing for us that really aren't, that are causing oxalate buildups, and all that kind of stuff in our bodies. So what if all of the things we think are because we're getting old aren't? Like, to me, that's just such a shocking statement. Like, what if you're not supposed to get sick before you die?
Yeah.
What if we're not supposed to get sick in our old age? What if we're supposed to live just like we're living right now at 80 or 90 years old or 100 until we die? Like, what if we don't have to be sick before we die? Isn't that just like, what if?
Yeah. Well, and if you look at the history, you find out that chronic illness was not at the levels that it was, not even close to the levels it is now if you go back 100 years. And a lot of the difference is ultra-processed food. Sugar entered our diet at much higher rates after the 1900s. And, we even knew early on that sugar was a big player in cancer. But that even that research got left behind, that Dr. Warburg had worked on for various political reasons. That got left behind. So when you look at pictures of people at the beach in the 1940s and 50s, you see a lot of people that don't have extra weight. There were some that had some. Everybody, genetically, there's differences. Plus, they're probably eating some of the wrong foods too. But genetics plays a huge role in it.
But even in the 70s and 80s,
yeah,
we didn't see people like we see them now. People were not as sick and not as overweight as they are now, even in the 70s and 80s.
Right. I think it really went crazy around the late 70s when the TV dinner became popular. And we joked about it back then. Who's going to eat that garbage? But eventually we saw people eating it, and we probably ate some of it ourselves. And now I remember when I first got married, most of what we went shopping for was the stuff in the frozen section that all you had to do was tear the box open, stick it in the microwave.
Yep.
And that's not a healthy way to eat. I was at the store today and I was recording down the aisles because I wanted to make something to share and just remind you, this stuff is not food.
It's not.
These are food-like products.
That's right.
And the only thing that makes them food-like is that they look like food. They have some of the ingredients of food, but the other ingredients in there are not food. And we're getting those in huge amounts. They look at it and say, well, there's only this much in this little container. But if you eat that same container every day of the week for the rest of your life, you're getting a lot, plus all the other stuff you're eating. It piles up. And back then in the 70s, it was okay to have a little bit of something bad because it wasn't that prevalent. Then as we got the food pyramid and they started telling us to drink a lot more milk and to eat a lot more grains and to eat whole wheat and to go low fat, it's like it took us from a simmer to a boil on our food situation. And now it's completely normal to eat things that are not food.
Yeah, absolutely. And another book, because we're talking about like the 60s and 70s here and how things were different then. Nina Teicholz, Big Fat Surprise. Have you read that?
Yeah, I didn't know it went back that far. And I'm glad you said her name right because I never say her name right. I've always said Teicholz or Teicholz.
Love her.
No, I got
her. That book, I've listened to it 7 times on Audible. So you guys out there watching, if you have not read that book is the biggest eye-opener. And honestly, one of the things I love most about it is that it's not written by a carnivore. I think that goes a long way. Like I always recommend Sally Norton's book and Nina's book because I feel like because they're not written by carnivores, that goes farther for like my friends and family when I'm trying to explain this to them because they think, oh, it's just biased because it's, written by one of your friends who's a carnivore, or whatever. So I love those two. But Nina's book, the way it explains what happened and about Ansel Keys and how it was just an unproven hypothesis. And that's why we are where we are. I interviewed Dr. Obadia one day, and he said that he has heard Ansel Keys referred to as the greatest mass murderer of all time. And look at where we are. Look at how many people are sick and dying every day because of food-related things that we probably wouldn't have if we'd have stuck with the higher fat, higher cholesterol diets we were eating back in the 70s and 80s. Like, he was a huge role player in that food pyramid that you mentioned. He, he orchestrated a lot of that in his white coat on the cover of Time magazine, talking about how bad fat is for us when there was never any basis for that.
And he had certain moneyed interests that were supporting his work that were doing that. And he bullied people into accepting his policies, and he ignored research that didn't fit with his criteria. So, and he was also the one that was in charge of leading the way. And if any research was being done that didn't match what he wanted or what the government had accepted that he was saying, then they
threw it away.
They just threw it away. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Really crazy that we allowed that to happen. But it seems like the tides are turning now. So that's amazing. It seems like things are coming back around where health is going to be something that we actually focus on in the United States. And that's amazing.
Yeah. And like Nina Teichels, like you mentioned, now we have Casey and Callie Means, who also come at this from a different angle. You got one that's coming at it as a medical doctor, and you got one that's coming at it as somebody who used to work in the food industry, who used to be in the lobbying part of the food industry. So he knows exactly the games that are being played to get us hooked on the drugs that are in the food that make us come back to it over and over. It's a mixture of stuff that makes you feel good initially because it gives you a dopamine rush, and then it makes you feel bad in the long run because it causes your body to have inflammation and other pains and problems. So it's like it creates a cycle. You feel bad, you go get something to eat, make you feel good for a second, but it's actually causing the pain, so you just keep repeating.
Yeah, it's really just heartbreaking.
Having them working on this, and I don't think either of them are carnivore either.
Or not.
So I appreciate, though, the fact that they're pointing out the problems with the food system and how it relates to our government, and how government interference is causing a lot of this problem too.
Yeah, I think it's amazing to have them out there helping with, this basic revolution of our food industry and the drug industry. Big pharma and big food, they've been put on notice, I think. So that's amazing.
I hope so. It's a big monster to tackle. They've got a lot of money and they got a lot of power, and they don't want to lose it. At this point, I'm just thankful that RFK Jr. has survived better than his father did, because he is speaking the truth to power, and that doesn't always go well. So
yeah, I think people forget that this is not a partisan issue. This is not something that we should take sides on. Anybody who is against this cleaning up the food and drug industry is just a delusional, crazy person, in my opinion. Anybody that could be against cleaning up the food for the sake of our children and for our elderly people, for the sake of us, for the sake of people our age, anybody that could be against cleaning this up and making a better, brighter, healthier future for everybody is, you must be making money on, on the drugs, or, you must have stock in those food companies and the drug companies or something if you think this is a bad thing. I think people are going to get healthier if you stand back and you look at the way America is, at any restaurant you go to, any mall you go to, any store you go to, any basketball game you go to, and you look around at the people. Most of the people are sick and overweight, and people will say to me, and they probably say this to you, don't you want to just be normal? Nope, I do not. When I look around and I see normal, that is not what I want to be right now, but I'm hoping that normal comes back around to healthy, and that we can all just celebrate the fact that something is finally being done.
Yeah, and the young people growing up right now don't know that this is not normal at all. I battle it with my teens, and they start to see it, but it's still very difficult for them because among their friends and when they go out to eat, they don't want to be, it's hard enough to fit in when you're a teenager, but then you start talking about carnivore diet and stuff like that. It makes it hard for them to even focus on stuff like that. They feel like they're invincible. They also see that it's everywhere, so it really can't be that bad if everybody's eating it, but they don't realize, they don't see what they can't see because they can't go back and see how it used to be. That's why we've got to be talking about it and sharing that information so that hopefully more young people will find out about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Dante, this was just a great conversation. Thank you so much for spending the time with me.
Oh, it was a pleasure. I hope I covered everything you wanted to cover.
Yeah, great conversation. I feel like we covered a lot of stuff, and hopefully we've changed some people's minds out there and gotten them to come over to our side a little bit. All right. Thank you so much
for having me on. Yeah, no problem.
Absolutely. And thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you next time on the Carnivore Revolution.